Hey guys, welcome to section 7 of this Spire tutorial, where we are going to be looking at the effects section over on the right-hand side of the top part of the synth. So you have these different types of effects. You have 5 different effects, or effect tabs rather, and to toggle between them, you just click on the little highlighted word or acronym for the effect. So the first one stands for shaping or shaper. This one that says SHP, and this is where you're going to have things like distortion and wave shaping effects. So you get all these different modes, and you get a bunch of them inside of Spire. So you can get a soft clipper, a warm clipper, a hard clip, a tube 1, a tube 2, a tube 3, a feedback triode, feedback sine, a filter plus decimator, and then just a decimator. So in all, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different modes of distortion / wave shaping. Now the difference between distortion and wave shaping is not super noticeable to the ear, but what's going on behind the scenes, distortion is going to be overdriving the signal, clipping, that sort of thing. And wave shaping is going to be adding like this feedback sine. It's adding a sine wave into the feedback loop of the distortion, so it's wave shaping type effect instead of just straight up distortion. But they sound very similar, albeit some are more subtle and some are more extreme. So soft, let's talk about what this would be helpful for. Soft distortion would be good for basses, leads, things that you want to dirty up. Add some character, because with all these different modes, you have low cut and high cut as well. You have a bit control. So if you really want an edgy thing, turn the bit rate down. You have a sample rate control on most of these types of distortions here, which is going to reduce the sample rate of the sound and the distortion. So yeah, I would say soft is good for polyphonic style sounds. It's not a super aggressive distortion. Warm's going to be good for polyphonic sounds. I use it a lot on plucks. So we can actually load up some sounds here. So you can hear it's just adding a little bit of, edge to that specific sound. So this one doesn't have any distortion, so let's mute the... So if we wanted this to just be a little bit more aggressive, it's that type of sound. So warm and soft are very good candidates for sounds that you're playing chords for, and you just want more of just some harmonic and saturation richness as opposed to straight up distortion. Now the hard mode versus soft. It's a pretty noticeable change in the overall sound of that effect. This would be good for things like basses and top sounds, electro, dubstep, that sort of stuff. Really edgy sounds. Next, you get the clipper. So this is a kind of like the massive hard clipper. Sounds very similar to the hard. All right, now moving on, you get this. Next, you get these 3 different tube types. So a tube distortion is going to add saturation. Typically think of like an old school tube amplifier for electric guitar. And you're going to get that kind of nice, warm, kind of an even distortion. You can't really hear the bits and the depth. So this is another good subtle candidate. And they get a little bit more extreme from tube 1 to tube 2 to tube 3. There's more bass frequencies, it sounds like, in tube 3. All right. And moving on, then you get this FBTRI. This is a feedback triode. It's great for like those brassy, nasally sounds from Melbourne bounce, depending on the genre, even tropical house. So here's our sound without the effect. and with the drive. So next you get the feedback sine. It's kind of like a sine shaper and massive, if any of you are familiar with that. It's introducing a sinusoidal wave into the feedback loop. All right, and then we have filter plus decimator. So you can see the drive doesn't work the same way. And then the last two are two different types of decimator effects, which can really have a drastic change, create a drastic change to the sound. All right, so now we've talked about the different modes. I want to get more into these controls. So all the modes have the same controls. They just may take on a different sound or effect to the sound. So you get the drive. So this is with the dry wet all the way up. You won't hear any effect to the sound unless you boost the drive as well as the dry and wet. All right, so the bit, this is going to reduce the bit rate, from 24-bit, 16, so forth. And unfortunately, you can't see the actual amount because it goes from 0 to 1,000, but you kind of got to guess. I would say that's about 4-bit right there. So yeah, and then you get the sample rate control here. And with this all the way up, it's at 44.1. I'm assuming it doesn't say that in the manual, but that would make sense. And if you reduce it, you got a slower sample rate. And then you get low cut and high cut, which is really nice. It doesn't do a whole lot. Low cut won't do a whole lot on every mode. Only if the mode is adding in some low frequency. So I would assume with the feedback sine, yeah, it's gonna have an effect. So yeah, the soft distortion or overdrive has very little effect. Then you get a high cut if you need to take out some of the high frequencies. Now you might be wondering, well, why do you need those in the distortion? Well, let's say you have a lead sound and it's a bright sound, but that's what you're going for, and you want to dirty it up or make it a little bit edgy or whatever the case may be. Sometimes when you add distortion or overdrive or wave shaping effects, it will basically just boost what you already had that was a good thing, and that expression, too much of a good thing is a bad thing, can be very true in synthesis. So you have these controls to where you can kind of cut out those frequencies. Then of course the dry wet we already talked about. Now this HQ stands for high quality. When it is on, it will be 8 times oversampling, so it hits the CPU harder, but some sounds may require that. And then you have this band control that when it toggles on and off, just like every other type of little switch inside of Spire, it'll illuminate orange. And what this is doing is, if you have it activated, only the distorted signal within the low cut and high cut value will be audible. So let's listen to this. Let's go to clip. So right now, it's taking out the non-distorted signal, and it's just the distorted sound. So it might be kind of cool to layer that in with certain sounds, or to duplicate your instance of Spire and then have one where it's just distortion and maybe one where it's not the band. So that's everything in the shaping tab. Next we get the PHS, which is the phaser / vowel. It doesn't say vowel anywhere, but you do have these different vowel modes here, so it can kind of like a format filter. So this is just your typical phasing effect. So it's a stereo widening tool. You have 1 stage all the way up to 6 stage. So with the dry wet all the way up at 1 stage versus 6 stage. It's a much more noticeable effect with the different stages. We'll talk about what the stages are to a phaser in a second. And then we get this vowel low. It's kind of a vowel filter, format filter. We get vowel mid. So you can see dubstep, Melbourne, all that stuff. It'd be great. And then you get the high. All right, so that's really useful. Not many synths have a straight vowel filter in them, especially synths that are older, like Massive and Silent and all those sort of synths, because it wasn't that popular. It wasn't a very big production trick like it is nowadays. So the newer synths like Spire do, which is really nice. So let's talk about these different controls here. Of course, you get your different modes. And I guess it'd be helpful actually to talk about first what is a phaser for those of you who don't know, or just to clarify for those of you who know what it sounds like but don't know what it's doing. So a phaser is a type of effect that's very popular in a lot of different types of synthesis. Guitarists use it. It's very popular. So basically what's going to happen in a phaser is it's used as a stereo widening tool, but it's basically a filter. And it's going to filter out parts of a signal by creating these series of like peaks, and it's described as peaks and troughs. So think of peaks and valleys if you want in the frequency spectrum. So the position of these peaks that kind of are boosted are filtered into your sound, they're going to be modulated and change over time. And so that's why you'll see with a lot of phaser type effects, you're going to see things like rate and frequency, because that's going to change the frequency where those peaks and dips are happening at, and then the rate at which they're happening, as well as the depth. So you kind of have like a low frequency oscillator control over the phasing effect. Now the stages will just basically mean that with the more stages you have, the more peaks and dips you're going to have inside of the filtering. So what that means to our ear is it's more of a prominent, pronounced effect. All right, so we have to the right of the stages box that can also double as your valve filter is this pre-button. Well, when this is illuminated and on, it means that the phaser is happening before the shaper if you want your sound to have phasing without the distortion. So that's helpful. So here is your frequency. This will determine the frequency of the phasing. So let me go to 6 stages. Right, then you get feedback, which is going to introduce negative and positive feedback depending on where you turn it. All right, I'm showing you with extreme effects so you'd hear it. I'd never use this in a sound, obviously. And then you get the spread here, which will spread out the sound of the phaser out left and right. Just not the actual sound, it's the dry sound itself. Then rate. Unfortunately, this rate isn't tempo synced, which is kind of a bummer. It'd be nice if it were, because it's just going from 0 to 1,000. See how it actually starts to get like a LFO type sound? Well, it's unfortunate that you cannot sync that inside of Spire, maybe with an update. And then of course you get the dry wet, which controls the amount of the effect. So with the Val, it takes on a little bit of a different idea with the frequency. The valve frequency, basically with the frequency turning up or down, you're going to get a little bit of a different vowel sound. That's how you get that kind of dubstep sound. So play around with those. Pretty cool effect. There's not a whole lot to explain with what's going on with that. All right, moving on to the chorus. The chorus isn't just a chorus effect. You also get a flanger in this. So even though you only see these 5 different tabs here, you do get much more effects. Obviously, you get distortions and wave shaping kind of distortion. You have the phaser plus the valve filter. You also get flanger inside the chorus. So you're already at about 8. And then you have the delays and the reverb. So going back to the chorusing effect, I like to look at chorus in 2 different ways, or I kind of like, you guys all know from my tutorials, I like to simplify more complex thoughts into things that are more musical. So here's how I look at chorus. It's a tool to do 2 things. First, and you can use both at the same time, just depends on the need, but the first thing that chorus does very well is it adds stereo width. It can help make the stereo signal a little bit stronger. So if I pull up a multimeter real quick, we can actually look at this. So we have a multimeter pulled up, and we'll look at the stereo content with our chorus off. Not a lot. And with the chorus on. Right? So there's now stereo content off. On. So that's the first thing that I think a chorus can be used for. It can be used to strengthen your stereo signal and widen the sound. Now the other thing it does is, and this is basically what the effect actually is doing, is it simulates a chorus. Think of a chorus of singers, a choir of singers, multiple voices, multiple guitars, symphony, multiple instruments, whatever it may be, playing the same thing. Well, I don't know if any of you play physical instruments like the guitar or sing or drums or anything like that. It's incredibly difficult to do proper doubling. So a lot of guitarists, and I play guitar and I do millions of takes when I do this because it takes me a while to get it right. But what guitarists will do is they will double their tracks. So they'll literally play the exact same thing twice. Well, no matter how good of a guitarist you are, we're not robots. We're not going to be able to play it the exact same way 2 times. It can be really close, and that's the point, is if it was the exact same, it would basically be like copy and pasting your track. But if you're a good musician, you can get so close, but yet it's still a subtle difference that it makes the sound wider and bigger because the ear is kind of picking up on the slight differences between the performances. That's what a coursing effect is going to do in a synth. So when you look at the mode, the easiest way to explain what this effect does is crank the dry wet all the way up to I think it's 1,000, and you get that kind of slight movement with the sound right now. Right now, if I go to the mode 6. A lot more of the effect comes through, and I didn't touch dry and wet. I look at this as basically how many players are doubling your sound. So right now it's just one extra player, 2, 3, all the way up to 6. If you look at that, it keeps things simple. So now you get things like delay time, which is going to delay the offset of the signal. You get feedback control, both negative and in a positive way. It can be crazy if it can add a crazy element to your effect. You get a rate of the coursing effect. So just like with the phaser, there's kind of similar controls for an LFO, a low frequency oscillator. You have the same thing going on with the coursing effect as well. You have wide, which will spread out in the stereo field the width of the course effect. And then again, with a lot of Spire's effects, you get low cut and high cut. All right, let's look at how we can make this be a flanger, because remember I said that the course can also be a flanger. Well, the first mode is technically a flanging mode, because right, it's not adding, it's just one voice, so it's just one player. And then modes 2 through 6 are activating the different coursing modes. So if you're looking at my analogy of 2 players doubling, you have to have at least 2. One wouldn't be straight course, because course is adding kind of a delayed signal. So 2 through 6 are different algorithms for coursing effect, but each algorithm to my ear gets much more prominent and the effect becomes stronger as you go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. All right, so that sums up the course effect. Let's jump over and mute it. Let's jump over to the delay. Now, this should be pretty straightforward for anyone who's ever done anything in a DAW or electronic-based music production. We have a delay plugin. You have delay left time, which is tempo synced here. It goes from a period of 64th note all the way up to 16/1, which is a very long time. Default note is 1 over, I believe it's ironically 1/6, which is a really weird time for delay left. Delay right's default time is a quarter note, so. Okay, so there's the effect, right? Now we have ping pong on. So ping pong means in a delay that it's going to bounce back and forth from left to right. So we turn that off. It sounds much different. So this sync button, if you don't have sync selected, the delay times that we just talked about, they're not going to be in musical values. They're going to be free running. That might be helpful if you're trying to just create a sound that's more interesting, like a pad or an atmosphere. So the delay left is going to determine the length of time of the first channel, the left channel, and how long you hear the delay. And the right is obviously going to be the right channel version of that. All right, the rate. This is the modulation rate inside of the delay. And you also get this feedback here in this modulation intensity. So let's look at how these affect the sound. Right? It's almost like a pitch bend to it. Kind of adds like a coursing effect. This is very similar to silence delay. You have feedback, you have the width. And it's important to note that the wide or the width is just going to control the delayed signal, not the actual dry sound itself. All right, and then the color will determine if it's kind of if the delay tails, the actual delayed signal is brighter or darker sounding. Let me turn the rate and feedback down. So it's a little bit brighter and more forward with the color up at 1,000. Kind of muffles those. So it's kind of like a basic EQ cut. And yeah, then you get dry and wet to control it. So it's pretty typical, delay for synth. So if we look at how it works with certain leads, so that's ping pong off. You typically won't see a lot of the modulator and the rate up for like leads and pads and musical sounds because it can become kind of a crazy effect. So yeah, it's on a lot of leads. It's great for the trance stuff. All right, so let me initialize this preset. Let's go on to the reverb. So the reverb is pretty cool. I wish it had different modes, though. It has plate. My personal favorite type of reverb for synths, I like to use not plate reverbs because that's a plate. If you guys don't know what a plate is, it's kind of hard to explain. But back in the day, before we had all this really cool digital technology, to get reverb, you had to actually be in a physical place that would produce reverb. Well, studios and engineers figured out that they wanted to be able to control the reverb, like on things like lead vocals and all that. So Abbey Road is a famous example where they created these custom plates. They're like giant metal plates. And they, hang them or suspend them in a room, and the singer sings into them, and they've built these to specs to control the reverb. Well, that's the algorithm of a plate reverb. I personally like using a room or a hall or a physical space for synths more so than a plate. But, I can't complain too much because Spire's reverb is better than a lot of reverbs in certain synths. I like it more than the reverb in Sylenth. It's pretty even in my opinion with the reverb in Massive, except that you get a sync and a pre-delay. So that's super awesome for EDM producers. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So here's plate. Here's mode 1 and mode 2. So plate 1 rings out a little bit longer than plate 2, so it's a little bit of a longer reverb time. So let's talk about this different type of the sync and pre-delay idea. So right now with sync unselected, my pre-delay will go from a value of 0 all the way up to 1,000. So there's really no way to determine how long in a musical sense that the value of the pre-delay is going to affect the sound. And if you're a beginner and you're asking what the heck's pre-delay, the pre-delay means that it's going to be there's going to be a delay or a time that elapses before you hear the reverb happen. So if I crank the dry wet up all the way to 100 and I hit a key, I'll hit this real hard so you can hear it on my keyboard. Hear that time in between where you heard that key press and then the actual pre-delay? Well, if I go to a 50-50 blend, do you hear that dry note and then the wet note? That's what's happening. So without it being tempo synced, it's not a very musical effect, and there's really no way to control it within a production. Well, with certain genres of EDM like main room, really any genre of EDM, a tip and trick that you can use to fill out your drop sections or to make certain sounds bigger is to tempo sync your pre-delay. And you can, if you hit sync, now the pre-delay is in musical value. So here's an 1/8 note delay time. So if I start playing like some chords here, It's kind of like a reverb meets LFO sidechain type effect, which is really cool. And you can use it on leads, plucks, basses, pretty much anything. So moving on, the damp, this is going to determine how much of the high frequencies are dampened. Kind of think of it like a damper. So if you have this all the way up and the dry wet all the way up, you don't hear really anything. And with the damp all the way down, it lets through more of the high frequency content. The width, this is going to widen the reverb signal. You can hear that. The decay, this is how long it takes for you to stop hearing the reverb. So you can see that's a pretty good musical representation of it. Right, so it is a musical reverb. And then you have color, which is going to kind of make it sound darker over to the left. Or the reverb's going to be a little bit brighter. And plate 2 sounds very similar to plate 1, except that it just doesn't have as much length in the sound, I would say. It's a little bit brighter sounding, too. So yeah, they're both kind of that plate algorithm, but they're a little bit different sounding, so you can play with the sonic palette. So that sums up the effects inside of Spire. I'll see you in the next tutorial.